Right, well, as I said, I'm really sorry I can't be there in person, but I'm very pleased that I'm able to give my paper. I'm going to talk today about coins and how they can tell us about curation and gift exchange and networks in the 19th century in Britain, not just in the north of Britain. And I'm not going to discuss the coins as items of currency, but more as historical artefacts within the Clayton Collection, which were gifted and exchanged with colleagues and friends, and also seem to have been valued differently to items such as jewellery or statuary in the collection. So next slide, please. So hopefully you're now seeing a map of the empire, just to put us all on the same page, and Hadrian's Wall is circled up at the top. So next slide. Another zoomed in to show you Hadrian's Wall and Roman Britain. So we're right on the northwestern edge of the frontier in the Roman period, but in the 19th century, it was also quite on the edge in terms of transport links, and it was quite a long way from London, so often was seen as, well, it is a provincial city, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't connected to those bigger cities. So we move on to the next slide, please. So the Clayton Collection, which is what I'm talking about, is a collection of archaeological material, almost all Roman, and mainly from the central sector of Hadrian's Wall. I'll show a map of the sites on. And it was all collected in the 19th century by a man called John Clayton, and mostly excavated by him. And that's what we're going to look at today. So it's an antiquarian collection of material from Hadrian's Wall, and has a very unique story and quite a complicated history. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of the scale of the collection, there's no need to look at every number on there, but it's a fairly large collection. One of the famous aspects of the collection is all the stonework. There's 97 altars from various sites and various deities. There's 53 centurial stones, the stones that were built into the wall and marked on by the soldiers who built the wall. So it's a really key collection for understanding the building of Hadrian's Wall and the construction. What we're interested in here today is that there's over 11,000 coins, which sounds quite a lot, but when we dig down into it, as I'll discuss, it's not quite as useful or quite as large an assemblage as you'd expect. So next slide, please. Just to show you here the sites represented in the collection. John Clayton was a very rich man and owned lots of land along Hadrian's Wall, and he owned 5 forts by the time he died. So every fort, every site that's underlined in blue, Clayton either owned or excavated at or had finds from. And in the centre there, Chester's in the red, is a key site that I'll focus on, and that's the site that he lived at. So if we move on to the next slide, the Clayton Museum. Now all of his collection is in this museum at Chester's Roman Fort, and you can see there in this black and white photo the array of stonework. And the museum is a really unique museum on Hadrian's Wall, and quite rare really in Britain, because it's been open to public continuously since 1896. And it was a purpose-built museum. It wasn't just Clayton's house with things in. It was purposely built as a museum. And even now, in 2018, the museum tells a story of Clayton and his collection. And we've kept this theme and this feel of it as being a Victorian museum and tried to unpick some of the stories. And so my PhD, which I completed a couple of years ago, was on the collection and really trying to get to the bottom of how the collection was formed and how things have entered and left the collection over the last 100 or so years. If we go on to the next slide, please. This is John Clayton. So John Clayton had a very long life. Even today, if you live 98 years, you'd feel pretty lucky. But he lived 1792 to 1890. He was the fourth of 11 children, a large family. His father was a solicitor, and he became a solicitor in the family law firm. but he's also the town clerk, which is a really important role in civic life. And so he had a lot of power in Newcastle, and he made a lot of money. When he inherited the family estate in 1832, that was his first fort. By the time he died in 1890, he owned 5 forts and nearly 20 miles of Hadrian's Wall, which is really, really huge. If we move on to the next slide, just to see on the top left where the sunshine is, you'll see a circle which is the driveway and the big garden for the big house that was the country estate, and that was the country house of the Clayton family. And the bottom, or the right-hand section of the slide, you can see Chester's fort. So Clayton grew up with that as his country house, with a fort in his front garden. And everything you see at Chester's now as a visitor is what Clayton excavated. Now, he was always interested in archaeology and classics and the past. It's said that when he came home from his school holidays, he would practice his Greek and his Latin on altars that were found in the fort in his garden. And his lifelong interest in this is what we think led him to purchase all of these farms. So he bought these 5 forts and the 20 miles of Hadrian's Wall by buying farms when they came up for sale, and he bought them to excavate and to save them from people stealing stone, etc., etc. And a really important part of his work was the networks he was in. So next slide, please. He worked with a huge number of other scholars, both in the northeast and further afield, and that's a really key part of his work and a really important thing to note. In the late 19th century, Roman studies or antiquarianism, there was lots of networks which overlapped, and you often would work with the same people. But Clayton seemed to work with almost everybody who was anybody in Roman studies. So John Collingwood Bruce, who's the top right-hand picture there, who is known as almost the father of Hadrian's Wall studies because he publicised so much, particularly publicised so much of Clayton's work. And he was the founder of the Hadrian's Wall pilgrimage, which still goes today. Charles Roach Smith, very well-known numismatist who did huge amounts to save the material from Roman London. He worked with Clayton and came up in particular to work on some of the coin hoards, which we'll talk about later. Robert Blair, who was a solicitor in Newcastle, hugely influential in saving South Shields or Arbea Roman fort. Henry McLaughlin, who was an army surveyor, the first person to survey Hadrian's Wall. The Dukes of Northumberland, who financed a lot of work on Hadrian's Wall, but also, interestingly, further afield, he used to send inscriptions or rubbings of inscriptions or coins to both Hübner and Mommsen in Germany to get, to check whether his readings of the inscriptions are right. And it was Mommsen, I think, who in Clayton's obituary said he never had to correct Clayton. So Clayton worked with lots of people, but was also extremely knowledgeable. So we move on to the next slide. He very much had an open house policy. So all of those people who were mentioned in the previous slide stayed at his house when they were coming to study the material. He very freely gave information about his collections and about his excavations to other people. And these 2 photographs here just show how the collection used to be displayed before it moved into the museum. But these networks that he was part of, I think, are part of the story of where the coins went, which is what this is all really leading to. He had people staying with him regularly. There was huge amounts of correspondence, and it was a very different world to kind of scholarly debate now. So if we move on to the next slide, the thing most of you are really interested in is the coins in the collection. Now, I said there was over 11,000. It's actually nearer to 12,000. And I've highlighted in red two big numbers. I'm not sure, I hope they're clear enough on this slide, but the Coventina's Well hoard, which is from Carabruff Roman fort, one of the forts that John owned, that's 9,344 coins. And the Walbottle hoard, which is a hoard that John purchased, the labourer had found it, that's almost 2,000 coins. So if you take out those two hoards and also take out some of the coins that were found after Clayton died and have been added to the collection, it's only 188 coins, which for 40 years of excavation on Hadrian's Wall sites is extremely low. For example, I've spoken to the team at Vindolanda who are excavating every year, and under modern circumstances, they find around 250 coins a year. Before kind of modern techniques, even in the 30s at Vindolanda, they were finding 15 to 20 a year in small scale excavations. So when you look at Clayton's excavations, that's averaging less than 5 coins a year, which is really unusually low. So I started to think some of these coins have gone astray, you know, where have they gone? And that's what got me into looking into some of these networks and these potential methods of exchange. I'm a Roman small finds person. I'm not a 19th century historian, but I got dragged down this rabbit hole when doing my PhD to try and track down where all these coins have gone. So if we move on to the next slide, I know Clayton was interested in coins. We have almost no paperwork of Clayton's. It all seems to have been destroyed, but we do have 3 of his coin notebooks. Well, 4. 3 of his neat coin books and 1 of his kind of more like a field notebook. And these are to do with all of the coins that he found. And he was extremely competent in identifying the coins to the emperors and to the correct denominations, etc. And also seems to have been very keen to properly record them, put them, he had his working book and then to put them into his neat book. So we know that he was interested in them. So he must have been keeping, you know, he must have been collecting them. And also he would have been asking his workmen to keep a lookout for them. So where have they gone? Next slide, please. I wanted to break it down into the routes into the collection and the routes out of the collection. And I think this is quite typical, really, of a lot of historical collections. Excuse me. Although some of the case studies will be very specific to the Clayton collection, but the general routes are the same. So routes in are excavation. We know he was doing this every year, but where there's not enough coins. Acquisitions, so he purchased the Walbottle hoard from a labourer who found it whilst digging drains, and came with an arm purse. We also know he was given objects from various sites, which I'll talk about, but the routes out are less clear and less well documented, and they're the harder things to understand, particularly from a 21st century viewpoint, because that's not something we as archaeologists or museum curators would ever look at. So there had to have been gifts and swapping between the collectors and the scholars. We know there were some thefts, and the one very specific thing that happened to the Clayton collection happened in 1930, the house sale, which I'll discuss in detail. So I just wanted to go through some of the different options to kind of give you an idea of how I've found out where things have gone. So if we move on to the next slide, please. I wanted to look at acquisitions here, just to give you a couple of examples. So again, see, talk about how different things were in the 19th century. Sorry, the cat's just coming in. For example, the Walbottle hoard, a labourer found whilst digging a drain, and Clayton thought that he'd bought all of the coins, that the labourer had sold him all of the coins. But in some of my studies, I've found that the labourer actually sold off a few batches of coins before Clayton purchased them. So he didn't even get the complete hoard. He also was given fines because he was known as being an antiquarian and a collector and someone who was interested in these things. A vicarage was being built at Netherdenton, about 10 miles away from his house, on the site of an early fort. The vicar found lots of Roman material there. So the Society of Antiquaries of Newcastle went along for an outing. Collingwood Bruce gave his thoughts on what this collection was, and then the fines came to Clayton. So they're just, a few examples. That sort of thing happened quite regularly, I think, in the 19th century. If we go to the next slide, please. This is a bit more of a specific one. Things in the 19th century seem to have been gifted often between antiquaries, and coins were a really good way of doing that because they're a very recognisable Roman thing. They're also very portable. And we've got one added extra incentive is that one of John's sisters, Sarah Ann, who he lived with until their death, was very keen on Roman coins. She was very interested in them. We've got letters, apologies, from her to coin dealers inquiring about what her coins could be. And we have coins in the collection. So the top right image is of her towards the end of her life, sketched in a house. And at the bottom right, it's difficult because the paper is so crumpled, you can't flatten it. But it says here, Miss Clayton, and it's coins that have been given to her by somebody who lives in Horncastle in Lincolnshire. Now, if she's being sent coins by somebody, it makes sense to me that something has been being given in an exchange. So we don't have that record because we don't know, and I haven't been able to track down the lady in Lincolnshire, in Horncastle. No one in the societies down there heard of her name, but we know Sarah Ann was being given coins, so was she perhaps also sending them out? She was also gifted coins from her aunt, who was a collector. So things are coming into the collection and not always being that well documented. Next slide, please. One case study on coins coming in, but also coins coming out to the collection. So I mentioned the Coventine as well. Coin hoard. There wasn't just coins in the well. The well was discovered in 1876. It's a shrine that was built over a spring in the Roman period, dedicated to the goddess Coventina. There's large numbers of altars. You can see the bottom right there is a lovely engraving from the London Illustrated News. The find attracted a lot of attention at the time, and when it was first discovered, things were being brought up to the top and put on the side, and you can see there's crowds of people there. It took them multiple days to do this, and on the first night that the site was opened, local farmers came and carried away coins. We don't know how many, but we do know that they thought that they weren't stealing them from anyone because the Romans had thrown them away and they had no monetary value. We know that around, if we move on to the next slide, please, sorry. We know that around 13,000 coins made it down to Clayton's house. And you can see here a beautiful watercolour by Richardson of the coins in the wicker basket, said they'd been carried down to the house. And Clayton basically brought in his scholars and his colleagues to come and identify them, and Collingwood Bruce and Roach Smith, Robert Blair and Canon Greenwell came and spent a few weeks at the house identifying all of the coins. The vast majority of them were bronze. We've got a full catalogue of what they identified. There was 4 gold and 184 silver. If we move on to the next slide, however, the coins that they could not identify, they melted down into the statue of an eagle, which you can see at the top right. And that eagle was made to go on top of a bookcase in John Collingwood Bruce's study. They don't record how many coins were melted down. I've done lots of calculations to try and work out the weight of the eagle and how many sesterci or dupondi that might equate to. However, there must have been some purification of the coins done because you can see how beautiful and bright the eagle is, and all of the coins from the well are very green, very corroded. So goodness knows how many coins went into that eagle. And we also know that some coins were given away, and we don't know if they were given away before that 13,000 so were catalogued or after. For example, the Hoyk Archaeological Society asked for some for their collection, and we know that a couple of the people who'd helped identify took some of the coins. So Coventine as well is a really nice case study that shows how coins have come into the collection and come out, neither end of which is a particularly well documented process, and I've been trying to track things down as much as possible. If we move on to the next slide, please. One major area where huge numbers of coins, as well as other items in the collection, were lost was that in 1930, Chester's Mansion House, where Clayton grew up and where he lived until he died, was sold. The heir of the family at the time didn't want the archaeological estate of Five Forts and didn't want this country house, so he sold it, and he sold everything inside the house. And it seems that coins were being still kept in the house, even though the museum had been open for 34 years. And this is a really good example of how coins are often seen as different to other objects in collections. So the stones and the jewellery and the pottery was in the museum, but coins were kept separately in what we think are coin cabinets. If we move on to the next slide, I've transcribed here the page that talks about the coins that were sold. And you can see here on page 97, it says Roman, Old English and foreign coins, etc. So it's really not that clear. And I've been trying to work out which of these coins might have been specific coins we know in the collection. So I've highlighted it in red here, lot 1572, the 3 Roman gold coins and 60 silver. I know they're a thorn grafton arm purse that Clayton purchased from the finder. But the others, they're pretty impossible to identify. I mean, 270 Roman first brass, silver and bullion. How do you know where they're from? I presume most of these coins are ones that Clayton's excavations discovered, but we just don't know, and we don't have that much information. Thankfully, from that useless list, there is a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. So if we go on to the next slide, when I started my PhD, one whole chapter was going to be on the coins from the Clayton collection. And I realised I could do no useful numismatic analysis at all. So I wanted to look at how I could use the coins to tell a different story, which is looking at these networks. So I started to look at how I could find coins that had left the collection. So looking in other collections, in other museums, reading the reports of Clayton at the time to see if I could identify, snippets where he, makes a throwaway comment saying he'd given coins. Really trying to drill down into Roach Smith's reports and records, because we know he was a coin collector as well as being a skilled numismatist, and also seeing whether, now that we've got Clayton's notebooks, we could match any specific coins to coins in the collection. I haven't got very far in a lot of those steps, despite this being a long process, but I have managed to track down coins in some of the other museums. If we go on to the next slide, this is a table here of coins that are now owned by the Society of Antiquaries of Newcastle upon Tyne, which I know originally came from the Clayton collection. And this I've been able to do because a lot of the members of the Newcastle Antiquaries went to the house sale in 1930 specifically to buy coins to rescue them from being sold And so, for instance here, Rankin Lyle and Captain Swan went to the house sale to buy material. So I have been able to track down a fair chunk. The wall bottle or Throckley coin hoarder I mentioned earlier, been one of the key things that I've looked into. So if we go to the next slide, I've really focused on the wall bottle hoard, and this was a radiate hoard that was found in 1879. I've mentioned it a few times as I've gone through, and if you look at the bottom right, the little map, the Throckley is underlined in blue there. It was found by a labourer, and as I said, Clayton purchased the hoard, hoping to purchase it intact with the pot, that's the vessel there that the coins were found in, because he wanted to preserve them all together, because often these hoards get dispersed because they're sold as odd coins for different numismatic interests. How we know that the finder kept some coins and he gave parcels of coins to other people, or sold parcels to other people. If we go on to the next slide, please. So I've been looking at the dispersal, and I found some of them in the site of Antiquaries collection, around 900, and Clayton purchased nearly 5,000 coins. There's just under 2,000 coins in the Clayton collection and another 900 in the Newcastle Antiquaries collection. So I know there's still some missing, but I've been working with Peter Guest at Cardiff University and Matthew Ponting from Liverpool University to publish an article to bring this together. So both Peter and Matthew in their PhDs looked at this hoard from different angles. So Matthew did some alloy analysis of the coins, and Peter redid all the identifications, basically to train himself to be able to identify radiate coins at the start of his PhD. And we published an article together last year to bring the wall bottle coin hoard together as a bit of a case study of these 19th century discoveries that have been written off because, well, they were identified in the 19th century, identification wasn't very good, it's been dispersed, we don't know where they've gone, what information can it add, or give us. And we found, even though we've updated the identifications with the most up-to-date references and etc., that at least our identifier, Robert Blair and Roach Smith, were pretty good, and we've been able to bring the modern numismatic understanding of radiate coins and minting processes, along with Matthew's alloy analysis, and bring together the full story and show how you can track some of these finds down. So if you come to the next slide, which is my last slide really, this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour through a small segment of my PhD, but we know there was many, many more coins that Clayton and his workmen found that are now in the collection and have been even been recorded at the time. And I hope that this little run through has shown that the coins in this collection have been a really good way into looking at the specific networks and antiquarian kind of foibles and things that they would do in the 19th century as a bit of a case study. I could have talked about different groups of material in the collection and it would have told us different stories, but the coins are really key to looking at these exchange networks. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Frances. And so now I open to questions. Any question?
You've all had a very long day.
We had. No, I have a question because I'm very interested in the antiquary. Do you need to change? I don't know. Yeah? Okay. So I'm extremely interested in the antiquarian period. I find it really fascinating. So we're talking about thousands and thousands of coins that were within the forts along the Adrian Wall, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more? They were mainly Roman, but from the lists, I saw also Greek coins and something that usually, if I'm not wrong, you don't usually find the gold and silver coins of value. Is this common within the Roman Empire in England? Is the Adrian Wall an exception?
Hadrian's Wall is a bit of an anomaly in all the material culture, really. In the north, it acts as a magnet because the soldiers were such a big market for money. But the coins along Hadrian's Wall are really not properly understood. I'm just, or a PhD student has just started under my supervision, and Peter Guest and James Gerard at Newcastle University to study the coins from Hadrian's Wall, to look at whether they differ in amounts and ratios, etc., from the rest of Roman Britain, but also compare them to other frontiers and other parts of the empire, because nobody's studied them as a whole. We don't have a big database and a group of the coins. I think the Greek coins in the Clayton collection were probably purchases by John. However, at Corbridge, Roman time,
we found in the excavations. They were
not those ones, but at Corbridge, which are on the sites that I look after, there are 4 tetradrachms from Alexandria, and so we do get coins from the east of the empire, even though we're usually getting the northwestern province mint coins. Gold and silver. Gold is pretty rare, but you do get them. Again, Corbridge, we have 2 gold coin hoards there, and silver, it's not as uncommon as you'd expect. Still do get a fair number, but of bronze, the bronze denominations are much more common. But the wall is a much denser kind of spot in terms of numismatic finds in the north of Britain. Definitely, just because there's so many soldiers there, the market and with their pay.
All right, thank you so much. Any questions? No? So Francis, thank you so much for your speech.
No problem.
Extremely interesting, the case study. Thank you.
Thank you, no problem. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.